I'm Janet Lambert, the CEO of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, and I want to extend a very warm welcome to you to the 2022 meeting on the Mediterranean. Who would have thought that it would take us 3 years to be back here in person after the inaugural meeting on the Med in 2019? But it makes it all the sweeter to see you all in person, having been often in our home basement offices and the like for the last couple of years. We're going to have 2 days of insightful panels and productive networking. We also have a rare opportunity to convene our European member committees in person on Friday. These 3 days are a chance to celebrate the successes and address the challenges of the rapidly evolving ATMP sector. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the ARM team, particularly Laura, Kelly, Jancy, Jeanette, and Savannah, who hopefully many of you will meet over the next 2 days, from our events team for all the work they've done and will do to put on a top-notch event for us all. And thanks to our Med Planning Committee, Stéphane Boissel of Sparing Vision, Nicole Faust of CEVIC, Chris Mason of AvroBio, and Chris Van of Autolus for helping us to develop a timely and compelling program. What I'd like to do is start by reviewing some of the progress our sector has made since we last gathered here in person before the pandemic. 6 new ATMPs were approved globally in 2021, the second best year on record. It was the best year on record for CAR T therapies, with 3 approved. And just in the last few weeks, one of the earliest CAR Ts, Yescarta, was approved by the US FDA as an earlier line treatment. We saw proof of concept for the first time last year that CRISPR gene editing can work when administered in vivo, with additional promising data released earlier this year. We are joined here at the meeting on the Med by Dick Sund, the head of Australia, Canada, and Europe for Kite Pharma, and Laura Sepp-Lorenzino, the Chief Scientific Officer at Intellia Therapeutics. At ARM, we're privileged to work with leaders like Dick and Laura and many others whose companies are breaking this new scientific ground every day. There are now more than 2,400 ongoing cell, gene, and tissue-based therapy clinical trials worldwide. About half of them are being conducted by 1,300 corporate therapeutic developers, and that number has grown by nearly 20% over the past year alone. 2022 could be a breakout year for the approval of new gene therapies to treat rare disease, with 4 such therapies up for approval across the US and Europe. The promise of treating serious rare diseases with transformative therapies has never been greater. But this sector is also making great strides on the path towards helping larger patient populations. 52% of global clinical trials are now targeting cancers, and nearly half of those are targeting prevalent cancers, gastrointestinal, skin, and breast cancer as examples. Nearly 60% of total clinical trials in the cell, gene, and tissue space are targeting prevalent diseases like diabetes and associated complications, and CNS diseases like Parkinson's. This scientific progress has been driven by a robust global investment environment, which has in turn fueled incredible scientific progress. Since 2019, when we were last here in person, investment in our sector has grown from nearly $10 billion in 2019 to nearly $20 billion in 2020 and $22.7 billion in 2021. There are significant challenges for public biotech equities, to be sure, right now, but long-term investment in the sector remains robust. ARM started hosting the meeting on the Med out of recognition that Europe is a leader and major contributor to the global growth of our sector in scientific discovery, regulatory frameworks, and in company formation. The European Union established a dedicated ATMP regulation that took effect in December of 2008, providing regulatory certainty and affirmation of the central role that advanced therapies would play in the health of EU patients in the years ahead. The EMA approved the first gene therapy, Glybera, back in 2012, 5 years before the US FDA approved its first gene therapy, the CAR T therapy, Kymriah. The EMA launched the PRIME scheme in 2016 to accelerate medicines that might address high unmet medical needs. Of the 18 medicines granted PRIME status through June of 2021, 7 are ATMPs. ARM has more than 80 members in Europe across roughly 15 countries. Europe, quite simply, is a major center of gravity for our sector, and that is in no small part due to Europe's vision in cultivating the future of medicine. That said, global dynamics have changed a great deal in recent years. There is very clearly growing global competition to cultivate this sector and the immense promise it holds to improve human health. The US has established a dominant position with more than 600 therapeutic developers, a 33% increase from 2018. Nearly half of the 1,200 industry-sponsored trials globally have a site in the US. The growth in Asia Pacific, and particularly in China, has been remarkable. The number of developers in Asia Pacific has more than doubled in the last 4 years, while the number in China has increased by a factor of 5. China now has nearly the same number of developers as does Europe. The number of new trials started in China has been higher than the number started in Europe each year for the last 4 years. And China has just approved its first 2 CAR T therapies. ATMP companies headquartered in the US have raised the vast majority of global investment in recent years, with Asia Pacific playing a growing role. Investment in Europe headquartered companies, however, has been largely stagnant. 7 ATMPs that were approved by the EMA were later withdrawn from the market, including Glybera, the first. We have seen too often that creating a clinically effective therapy isn't enough, that tackling the commercial challenges and realities is critical to reaching patients. Our plenary session today, to kick off this meeting, will address that very topic. Recently, we conducted a survey of the ATMP sector, organizations and companies that are already engaged in Europe and those planning to be engaged in Europe in the future. 57% of those respondents said their organization was concerned about the EU's ability to compete with other regions as desirable locations for cell and gene therapy developers to establish headquarters, to conduct clinical trials, and to commercialize products. We're encouraged, however, that policymakers in Europe recognize the shifting global landscape and are committed to reinforcing Europe's leadership role. And we at ARM have put together an agenda for this meeting on the Med that reflects these dynamics and the moment we're in. In just a few minutes, you'll hear from European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, Stella Kyriakides, who will place ATMPs in the context of Europe's overall goals for healthcare. We've organized a panel later today in which payers will discuss early dialogue with developers, cross-border access, and how to properly evaluate the value of ATMPs. And we are pleased to be joined by officials from the European Commission, Parliament, and the EMA for a panel discussion Thursday focused on the policies needed to ensure the EU's competitiveness for years to come. This 2022 meeting on the Med comes at an opportune moment for the EU's evolution as a destination for the ATMP sector. Working together as a sector with policymakers, we have a tremendous opportunity to update the regulatory and policy frameworks needed to ensure that European patients are the beneficiaries of these cutting-edge therapies, and to help ensure that Europe continues to present a robust ecosystem that encourages investment, scientific research, and commercialization of advanced therapies. The Pharmaceutical Strategy for Europe, released in 2020, referred to ATMPs as milestones of major progress. This strategy sets out the vision for a first in 20 years revision of the EU's pharmaceutical legislation. As policymakers consider these updates that will affect the development of and access to our medicines, ARM is working to ensure that they understand that ATMPs are fundamentally different from traditional pharmaceuticals. The European Commission's proposal for the revision is expected by the end of this year. We're also working with policymakers to address the impact the GMO requirements on ATMP clinical trials in the EU. Our members have told us that GMO requirements, which are often implemented differently across different member states, lead to delays in clinical trials and ultimately to access for patients. The new regulation creating joint clinical assessment at the EU level is a significant first step towards greater harmonization and the reduction of duplication across member states if it's done right. Starting in 2025, ATMPs will be among the first products to receive joint clinical assessment. And we're working with policymakers now to ensure that these review methodologies are fit for purpose for ATMPs. You'll hear substantive discussion of all these important and regulatory initiatives and more throughout our 2 days together. There's also plenty of content focusing on the investment, scientific, and strategic landscape that rounds out the ATMP ecosystem. This afternoon, we'll have a session looking specifically at the European investment environment for our sector and what to expect in 2022 and beyond. We'll end the day with workshops focusing on the future of advanced therapies and scale-up of manufacturing. Tomorrow, we'll learn how to navigate gene therapy commercialization and reimbursement and hurdles, and hear from some of the seasoned executives on what it takes to build a successful ATMP company in Europe. We'll round out the conference with a workshop on incorporating process knowledge into manufacturing and another on trends in gene editing and gene therapy. Throughout this conference, you'll have the opportunity to attend more than 60 dedicated presentations from the leading public and private companies in our sector. We will certainly discuss some of the challenges in Europe over the next 2 days, but there is a recurring theme that will also resonate through all of the content that we've put together. The opportunities available to the sector, policymakers, and patients are vast. In our recent survey of the ATMP sector in Europe, we asked respondents to tell us what positive or negative changes they expected to see in Europe over the next 5 years. 2/3 of respondents said they expect positive changes, including greater collaboration, an increase in EU trials and approvals, and efficiencies in regulatory and production processes. Only 10% of the survey respondents expected future changes to have a negative effect on our sector. We at ARM share this optimism about the sector's future in Europe. It's why we've invested in hiring additional staff in Europe and why we've conducted more than 75 meetings with policymakers across the continent last year alone. We're also deepening our engagement at the country level, both within and outside the EU, in France, in Germany, and in the UK. We recognize that a significant amount of the sector's future in Europe will depend on what happens within national boundaries. We're so excited to be here in Barcelona with all of you this week. We have a great deal to accomplish together, on behalf of patients in Europe. Now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Stella Kyriakides, the EU Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, who will give us a brief virtual welcome address. We know how incredibly busy Commissioner Kyriakides is with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and the many challenges that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has presented to the EU, its leaders, and its people. We're extremely grateful for her perspective. The Commissioner's willingness to spend time with us is another sign of the importance of the ATMP sector in Europe and to Europe's future and the possibilities ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine have highlighted the need for European cooperation to protect our citizens' health. That's why Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, the pharmaceutical strategy, and the role that advanced therapy medicinal products, or ATMPs, could play in both are so important. It's worth remembering that the EU was the first to approve a gene therapy medicine. It was also the first to specifically regulate those products via the ATMP regulation. The EU now leads the world as regards approved therapies in this sector. However, competition, notably from the US and China, is strong. Our pharmaceutical strategy with the reform of the pharmaceutical legislation gives us a chance to improve our system and adapt it to the latest scientific developments. The strategy also recognizes that for innovation to take root, Europe's companies need a fertile environment, offering regulatory flexibility, legal certainty, a conducive intellectual property regime, and the necessary infrastructure. We have no plans to overhaul the ATMP regulation. However, we will look at ATMP specific characteristics when reviewing the pharmaceutical legislation. ATMPs are a challenging concept for science and manufacturing alike. We are aware of the specific challenges for developers, such as the thin line between the tissue and cell legislation and the legislation on ATMPs. We aim to strike the right balance between incentivizing innovation and making sure that it results in cost-effective, affordable therapies for patients across the EU. We will also assess the requirements for authorizing medicines containing or consisting of genetically modified organisms. These requirements should be able to cope with the specificities of medicines and the conduct of clinical trials with them in the EU. Turning now to cancer, the recent achievements in regenerative medicine are also speeding up and improving cancer treatment. Major initiatives stemming from Europe's Beating Cancer Plan will benefit from these developments. They include our interspeciality cancer training program and our comprehensive cancer infrastructures linked by a robust and efficient network across the EU, which will help develop a high-quality health workforce offering high-quality cancer care. The Cancer Diagnostic and Treatment for All initiative, supporting efficient personalized cancer diagnosis and treatment, will help scale up available results in the genetic profiling of patient and tumor cells. And, meanwhile, with the mission of cancer, we will continue harnessing the potential of research, innovation, data, digitalization, and new technologies for cancer management. Our aim is clear: to boost high-standard, quality-assured diagnosis and treatment across the EU, improve outcomes as a result, and offer all cancer patients, their families, friends and carers hope for a better future. Ladies and gentlemen, in these very dark times, let's set our sights on that brighter future for European patients. With your help, we can ensure that advanced therapy medicinal products play their part in building it. Thank you.
What a great message to start the first day, and a wonderful recognition of the importance of our sector in the midst of all of the issues facing the Health Commissioner of the European Union. I hope you'll reconnect with colleagues and enjoy the sessions and everything this lovely location has to offer over the course of this meeting. Thanks again for investing your time with us this week.